Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Celtic Frost of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka a Me Too incident occurring in Jari from Winter Sun's third sauna.
And I am the black metal guy, aka Horned Hunter of the Moonlit Glade.
I think that was one of the main heroes I used in Warcraft 3, so that's cool.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, that's basically that guy or Orion from Warhammer. Yeah. Fucking Chad Orion.
A lot of board game discussion and tabletop discussion on the Discord lately.
Yeah, I'm glad we managed to align ourselves with Warhammer. That was successful, Brandon.
That was early on.
Yeah, true. But like we now have fans who talk about it in the Discord. You've been playing a lot of Gloomhaven, you said?
Yeah. My wife got it for me. It's something that I always thought of picking up, but the price tag on that guy is pretty steep, but she decided to splurge as a gift, and I am ready at any point to quit this podcast to become a full-time professional Gloomhaven player.
Are there Gloomhaven podcasters?
There should be. I'll just
you
start
could probably
up
make a
another
lot. I mean, dude, you could probably make a lot of money doing that. Like that, there's a market for that shit. Nobody cares about fucking Lithuanian war metal, but
well, a few people do apparently. Of a very small.
If somebody told me Lithuanian war metal, I would click.
Oh yeah. All right, so you got a little bit of news that we're going to be covering next week, right?
Yeah, mini news. Our bro in Ancient Gate from Argentina has put out a new EP to follow up on last year's excellent Empire Beyond Dusk, which was pretty much the first review that put us on the map, I'd say.
Yeah.
He was really supportive back then, and this new one is a pretty substantial EP. We're going for well over 20 minutes, so it'll get a review next week for sure. And it's pay what you want on Bandcamp right now. It's called Forgotten Dark Age.
It's just designed for you.
Yes. Oh, and it's got a great cover too, dude. Very like
I saw that.
Primordial extreme metal, Celtic knots, sort of. It could almost be like a Deviated Instinct or Bolt Thrower cover.
I was about to say it could be like a crust cover or something.
Exactly, yeah.
No. All right, I've been terrible about remembering to mention this lately, but, which is amazing because I've been doing it for almost a year now. Social media, follow us on it. Whatever service you happen to be listening to us on, be that Spotify, directly off Podbean, or maybe Tidal. Maybe you're listening on Tidal or Deezer or something like that. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you're listening on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, send us a lock of your hair. And then if you really want to get fully vested in the Terminus multi-level marketing empire, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. I run the Facebook over at Terminus Podcast, and the Black Metal Guy runs the Instagram over at Terminus Extreme Metal. But then, more importantly, should you want to truly join the paramilitary forces of Terminus and join our Black Circle, you can do that on Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to all of our Terminus Prime bonus episodes, the newest of which was a very cool, very long tutorial on the forgotten torture doom scene of the 2000s. And then $5 and up, if you're feeling social, gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server, where, as I discussed earlier, we pretty much just talk about board games now. Metal has fallen way by the wayside. It's all memes and board games all the way down.
Yes. Although, with sort of invaluable nuggets of metal wisdom interspersed.
Always. Well, I mean, everything that we disgorge from our mighty throats is invaluable metal wisdom.
All right.
Okay.
Should we tell them what we're doing?
Yeah, we should. I'm really excited about today's episode because we've got 4 records that I just fucking love. Like,
we got 3 records that I fucking love.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but no, I think as far as like just pound for pound, every record, this is one of the best episodes of the year as far as my personal enjoyment. So spoilers, all of these are awesome. We're mixing it up. We're going back and forth this time. So I've got the opening slot with the debut record by Oriflamme. And correct me on my pronunciation. Legide Ardente?
No, Le Guide Ardente. The strong accent, it's like accent aigu, the one that turns towards the right, opens up towards the right, means that you make that like an A. So it's Le Guide Ardente, yeah.
Le Guide Ardente. Well, plus it's Quebecois French, so I don't know how that alters the pronunciation too.
Le Guide Ardente.
Really just make it spicy.
Sound really drunk, yeah.
Get that real fucking poutine voice going. Well, anyway, this is Metal Noir Quebecois, and it is fucking awesome. Brand new band came out of nowhere with this debut record, and this is out on Sepulchral Productions, who is a label that we've gone back and forth on over the years. I think they put out a lot of stuff we really like and a lot of stuff that we don't like, but this one's a fucking slam dunk. And I think that pound for pound, if you're a Terminus listener and you like the sort of aesthetic we've cultivated on the show, just click out of the tab and buy it now. You're in for a treat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Honestly, kind of same with the next one.
Yep.
Maybe a little more poppy than a lot of the stuff we cover on the show, but certainly bracing, heroic, and absolutely insane. This is Auspicious Atavism by a band called Anahata. This is a new project, debut full length. I think it's an independent release for now.
It won't be for long.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also, I bet these are the kind of guys who seem like they'll build their own infrastructure, that maybe they'll make a label. But yeah, so this is, if you've listened to our Cromlech interview, I talked there with those guys about the notion of Cromlech as an extreme heavy metal band. This is basically power metal, but strongly tending towards extreme heavy metal, and there are some common motifs with the Oriflamme that we can get into.
Oh yeah, definitely. Lots of very interesting threads throughout this episode. So for my second contribution, you got your black metal in my anime soundtrack. Oh no, you got your anime soundtrack in my black metal. It is Midnight Betrothed's Dreamless, out on Atrocity Altar and Northern Silence. Very lo-fi, digital, symphonic black metal after a fashion, but we think it's closer to some other things. So, and I think the spoiler here is this one, the one of the four that you're not quite as keen on.
No.
But that was fully expected when I chose it.
Yeah, for sure. No, it'll be good content.
All right, so wrap it up for us.
All right, and then finally, as a sort of bouquet of spring flowers for the death metal guy, I chose Anatomia's Corporeal Torment. This is out on Meisako on Oyo Records, or Dark Descent, depending on whether you are in the USA or Europe.
Yeah, I think Misako is doing the vinyl press, and then Dark Descent's doing the CD.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, Dark Descent are like CD diehards. Yeah. So yeah, Anatomia, for those who don't know, is a long-established Japanese sort of, I guess, death doom band. People often associate them with autopsy worship. However, they have gone much further afield this time, and it turns out to be pretty fucking cool.
Yes, it does. All right, first up, very excited to talk about Oriflamme. And you pronounce the album title. You're better with French than me.
Le Guide Ardente.
Le Guide Ardente.
On the Quebecois label Sepulchral Productions. Did they do the Cimetière that from last year?
Let me check, because I
right.
want to say
you
yes,
check
but it
while
might
I
be...
talk.
Sure.
Or I guess, wait, this is your pick. You should fucking talk. Whatever. We'll figure out the Cimetière later.
Let's see. Cimetière. That was... Let's see. Extinction. No, that was on Epitaph Productions, but I think they're like affiliated with Sepulchral in some fashion. Anyway, Oriflamme, really not a lot of information to go off of. This is a 3-piece from Montreal. Looks like the main guy with like the most experience is going to be the drummer, a guy named Morthios. Who is he's like done some live work with Akitsa, and he's just been in a few kind of black metal groups from around the area that I'm not super familiar with, like Atramentis, Gavura, Sanctus, etc. And, I mean, shit, this is one of those cases where, from the first few notes of the first song, it was like, oh, well, this is prime Terminus material. I don't think we've had a record that has hit all the notes based on what we like and our listeners like more completely than this, you know?
Yeah, this is pretty up our alley.
This is as though someone was crafting something specifically to appeal to us. Because, I mean, it's hitting... So this is a true black metal record that I would describe, at least, as very within the sort of solar metal tradition that we've discussed a little bit on the show. This owes a lot to Spite Extremewing. Yep. And in this case, I don't think that it's a parallel evolution thing. I think they specifically listen to Spite Extremewing.
It's not just because we're obsessed with Spite Extremewing. They probably actually listen to them.
Yes, they. This is probably been case. Yeah, it's very rare to find someone who actually. But I think they did a lot of hard listening to Spite Extremewing. And as far as describing the sound, you got your Spite Extremewing. This is in some places comparable to something like Old Dewan Gash. And some of the riff patterns are a little bit like Seigneur Voland, but, you know, we were going back and forth on the notes on this, and I think that based on my description, you were expecting something a lot brighter and more airy, and the actuality is this is actually much darker in tone and in style than a lot of those kinds of bands, which I think is an interesting differentiation.
Yes, this is certainly, definitely fits in the solar metal tradition for sure, in terms that it's drawing on this Italian and French thing, in that it's, goes for this, a very sort of noble atmosphere, and in that it's preoccupied with the sun. It's called Oriflamme is the band, right? So that is, you know, Gold Flame, or something like that. Yeah, Golden Flame, and it was the special, like, it was the magical battle standard of the French kings in the Middle Ages, starting at least with Charlemagne.
Oh, nice! I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so it's this. If you look it up, it's really beautiful. And when they raised the Oriflamme, it meant that there would be no quarter till the battle was over. So you can see the survival of pagan imagery into Christian times, right? It's, you know, the sun, of course, they'd associate it with Christ, but it also goes back to the late Roman Sol Invictus and Mithra, or Mithras, sorry, these sort of martial sun worship cults in late Rome. We'll get into that for real with the Anahata.
Oh yeah,
and it relates to ideas of human sacrifice.
Yeah, no, I think...
for instance, there are moments in the Old Testament, different tradition, but in the Old Testament when, like, you know, Yahweh will tell them to just raise a town and sort of, put the whole town to the sword as a sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It relates to that structurally. It parallels that, and you could see it relating to something like a Viking casting... Viking chieftain casting a spear over the heads of his enemies to consecrate them to Oda, right? So it's like, when the Oriflamme goes up, glorious sun banner, but no quarter.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, it definitely does convey that atmosphere of, you know, being extremely dark and warlike, you know, despite its brightness and its consonance and how, kind of tragically beautiful everything is. It's chivalric, but it's not forgetting that knights were supposed to kill people. You know,
I don't think the best chivalric stuff does. I think it just brings a very different atmosphere to that.
Well,
than we usually
compared to something like Vehemence, you know.
I think Vehemence is about killing people. It's
It's nicer about it though.
Well, that's the intensity of it. That's the yes. It's asking you to imagine this completely different worldview.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's like there are the way people talked about it in the Middle Ages would seem bizarre and crazy to modern people. Even the Vikings the Vikings don't aestheticize it as much. Right.
Yeah.
But yes, I hear what you mean. This is, very brooding music. It's, the other sort of overall impression thing is the name of the record, right, is Le Guide Ardente, translates to something like Fiery Aegis. And the Aegis is Zeus's storm shield, which he gives to Athena. It causes terror in the enemy. So you can see how that relates to, the Oriflamme. It causes terror in the enemy, and it's associated with, storm, turbulence, but it's a fiery Aegis. And so, I kind of associate this record with, say, like, sun through massive distant cloud formations.
Yeah, I can see that.
I had expected this record to be, sort of bright, propulsive, highly riff-oriented, and it turns out that, it turns out that it works quite differently, which we'll get into.
Yeah. Just so people can hear it, we got a 2-part sample for you. Well, 2 sections off the same song. So I think
I honestly kind of wanted to play this. I honestly did want to play this one last.
Oh, really? Okay, we can do that then.
I'm just being fancy. But I think in terms of capturing the actual, why don't we start with yours? Well, we can start with mine, and I'll say a little something about it, and it will feed well into yours, because I'm guessing you went for one of the more classically kind of bright or solar moments.
Possibly. Yeah, I mean, everything's a little murky on this record. You got moments of bright in the dark and vice versa.
So if you want one of the moments that actually sounds like Spite Extreme Wing, this is the very beginning of the record. Le Guide Ardente, or Ardente, I think. Right? I spelled it wrong in the notes, sorry. And what we're starting out here is at the end, it's kind of A1, B1, A2, B2 traditional structure. So we're coming in at the end of B1, and then we're going to go into the main riff, and then back to the B riff. The main riff is very, but the B riff is really interesting. So here we go.
So that should prove all of our listeners should just be buying this.
So that was fucking sick, right?
Yes.
But so to me, if you want to pick out individual riffs on the record, right? I love as soon as the first hit, I knew I was going to love it because I love just how sort of minimalistic, manly it is. It has the kind of It has a kind of clarity and austerity you get in a lot of the Spite Extreme Wind riffs. It's just like, here are fucking power chords, right? But right after that, you get one of like the best riff on the record, if you had to isolate a riff, which is just this. It's got a lot of the riffs on this record are these kind of big block-based riffs, which I'll get into more. This has a lot of motion in it. The second one, it's very flowy, but it's not. It's not ripping. It's not sort of surging forward. They have this.
It's monolithic.
Yes, exactly. You get these sort of accented notes that fall at odd times, right? So da 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 da. And so they move it, but it has this sort of floating celestial quality. It's monolithic and yet light, right? Which is why I think of really big clouds. It's just rhythmically really cool. Also, I noticed on the second go-through, I don't know if you noticed it, that the riff actually has an internal variation to it. So, like, the first version of it, the second version is different from the first, and you could almost order it as just one really long, sort of flowing, hovering melody.
Oh, yeah, that's getting to the point where it's almost not like a variation. It's almost just one enormous riff.
Exactly. It's getting towards into Oblivion territory, yeah. It is the same riff. They've just changed a few intervals, but because it's so flowing, it really does feel like one thing. And so, that is cool. That is rising beyond the riff to, like, melody, right? And then we get this... At the end, you could hear it slow down. You know, there are lots of dropouts in this music, which you'll get into. But we get a rapid drop, and it slows down. And after that, it goes into this kind of... also a thing that I wasn't expecting, based on the general things you associated it with, which are, again, all solid reference points. But it's kind of melancholy slow part, right? And that is very, like... There are a lot of those on this record. They're pretty important to it. I normally don't like parts like that very much, or could take them or leave them. But there's something on this record where, like, there's a kind of sublime slowness even to the blasting, which I'll get into later. And these slow parts seem to work with it. They're well written, and they are well written and, I think, passionate. And the last track, Ultime Rempart, has a lot of that, and where it's very central to the song.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that is also very central to the music, which is the pacing, because this really does operate pretty much only at like an upper mid pace. Like the blasting sections, the blast beats are very slow comparative to a lot of other stuff in this style. I mean, like Spite Extreme Wing is really fucking fast a lot of the time, and these guys are hanging out right around the 200 BPM mark through most of the album. But, what they're losing in pure speed, they're making up in the ability to really dig into those chords. It's super physical playing. It's a different feel. I mean, I don't think it gets any more physical than Spite Extreme Wing, but it's certainly... But, well, differently. In Spite Extreme Wing, in Spite Extreme Wing, it's beautifully physical in that it's, it's got this liquid, agile quality. This has, like, a stomping character to it at all times. I don't know. I always imagine Argento picking from his elbow, kind of. Like, it's like they're really into the Misfits, It, like, SCW thrashes, I think. Yeah, whereas I can see these guys sort of, like, swaying back and forth. I could see these guys playing trem kind of like Neurosis plays plays like whole notes. I imagine these guys on stage like rigidly stock still the entire time.
Have you seen Neurosis footage? They're just I haven't. They just get really, it's this kind of stately, majestic music, but they get really into it. And, Steve Von Till, he's not a big guy, but he's a very fierce, tough guy, sort of like a dwarven chieftain. He just stands in the middle of the stage, like legs, power stand. Does that shit that nobody does anymore. He just straight power stances and punches his guitar. That's always good. All right, so let's get to another sample from the end of Le Guide Ardente.
which is the section that I chose. And I think that actually we're going to be starting with the same riff that your sample started with, or at least a modification of it. And then it's going to spin off into kind of the climax of the song. And I'm glad that you featured that riff also, because one of the things this reminds me of a lot is newer Maquahuitl. Like doing very austere, sort of blocky, chord-based versions of some of the riffs off Con su Pistola and La Mano. Because you can hear that that idea of toying with the most epic intervals of the pentatonic scale. You can hear almost that Western feel. I would argue that this is basically outlaw rock, as we understand it. A little bit less on, some of the hardcore influence, but as far as the black metal reference points, I think it's 100% there. Oh no, man, that so it's actually the first riff off your sample is the final riff on mine. I got it turned around a little bit.
What a closer, though. How that all builds back to the first riff.
Oh, it's a huge way. Like the way they cycle back. I wonder if it's one of those songs where it's like, they swim out and then they come back to shore just in like a direct reverse order of riffs or something like that. And it works wonderfully. Tide goes out, tide comes back into the origin, and that originating riff, which I'd say that's the one that really stuck out to me, is very Maquahuitl.
Dum 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 dum. Yeah, I could see that.
Because it's got that kind of spaghetti western chord progression there.
Yeah, I could hear. Yeah, I hear that for sure. I mean, yes, there are. It's weird. Maquahuitl is often writes these really elaborate flowing riffs. But on Con su Pistola, he's definitely doing more because it's more ballad-like. Mm-hmm. He's leaving himself more room for vocals, so he's definitely doing more chord-based riffing, a lot of it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the cool things about Maquahuitl is the juxtaposition of these huge chord riffs alongside these, honestly, very technical, very challenging kind of lead-oriented riffs. Mm-hmm. And this has a lot of that same quality, just distilled into this very austere, very kind of gloomy style. So it conveys a lot of it's hitting a lot of the same kind of emotional shades, but in this very muted, darker manner, which is, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, this is certainly like, I certainly hear that connection. In terms of what, yeah, so regarding the outlaw rock thing, for me at least, when I think of that, to me it's always meant something like it's oriented around rockish beats. So like mid-tempo stuff, whether it's stomping or kind of slowed down skank beats or kind of breakdowny stuff. And even the fast part, and they're sure blast beats are important to it. It has a relation. It comes from black metal, right? But like the blast beats are more at most alternating with those slow parts, and often the blasts themselves don't feel that fast. Mm-hmm. So a good example of this would be probably the most black metal sounding band that I'd say is definitely outlaw rock is like Mortem or something, and their blasts, those are basically war metal half blasts, right? And there's just all this stomping stuff or like almost grunge rhythms coming in there in between it. And to me, this record operates way more in traditional black metal ideas of tempo. This is like we're either in full-on blast, which has a feeling of sort of not like rock kind of mid-tempo, not sort of walking, running pace, but like it is this kind of it's both very fast and very, very slow at the same time, and we alternate between the blast parts and the very slow kind of trudging burzum-y parts, which again, not a big outlaw rock thing, I think. So that's the one thing. And then more conceptually related to that, I feel like that the outlaw rock stuff has something telluric about it. Like it's usually kind of, there's something earthy, whether that's literally or figuratively. Like it's
okay.
Like Mortem, you can hear them standing on the hills of the hills and mountains of more rural New Jersey where they're from, right? Or like there's this earthiness to the folk narratives in Maquahital, and the tempos again it's all very on the ground. It's dung da da dung da da dung. You're on your horse, right? Out riding the law, or elegiac is also just sort of like standing on the mountainside howling kind of music, right? And this music all just it floats so freely for so much of the record that it feels like it's just a different. It feels more rooted in traditional black metal. The
fundamental. Well, it's interesting because now I'm thinking of it in these. Oh man, get pretentious. I'm thinking of it in this super abstract way of like of the four elements. The fundamental one to this music is air.
For sure. No. It's like this is like the aegis. The vast.
And I'd say that like, but I'd say like Spite Extreme Wing is very kind of air element black metal as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't hear Spite Extreme Wing except maybe their last record as related to outlaw rock. I mean, it's an ancestor of it in some way for sure. But like Spite Extreme Wing, Spite Extreme Wing is like this is like big roiling clouds. Spite Extreme Wing is thunderbolts.
Definitely. And I think you've got a Spite Extreme Wing sample for us to kind of bring this together with Oriflamme a bit, right?
Oh, yeah, but I want to do that. Yes, okay, this makes sense. Okay, so, yes, this order makes sense. Thank you, Death Metal Guy. He rearranged them before. So, so in terms of what the closest... Spite Extreme Wing, as the Death Metal Guy says, often is just an extraordinarily fast band. Maybe the fastest band ever. Not necessarily in terms of absolute playing speed, right? But in terms of just dizzying momentum. And, yeah, they're sort of like terrible clarity, these riffs that stand out with this very stark, clearly defined forms, even when they're flowing, and this kind of inexorable attack. It's just ripping music that has a close connection to hardcore. And this is generated by certain things in the shapes of the riffs. They often have, like, inbuilt asymmetries that will give the riff a momentum or direction, so that they sort of hurtle from one riff to the next. Like, say, like and it relates to like punk syncopation and thrashy, slayery ideas of how you shape a riff to just barrel ahead.
Yeah.
But in places they do use something closer to big block chord riffing, often in sort of climactic moments. So here, this is from, you said this sounds a lot like the back end of Non-Duke or Duco, and I think you're right. That's their darkest record. Spite Extreme Wing says it's their sort of, what's the phrase they used? It's their least solar, and it has a lot of the sort of, the grit and filth of like old school black metal, they described it as. But you'll hear both. I think this will be good for people because you'll hear both the parallel. This is their version of big block chord riffing. They create a more sort of stable, steady kind of form. But you'll also hear just how fucking fast it feels. So let's just start the sample. This is from the beginning of La Torre del Silenzio. Yeah, so you could hear the similarity there, right?
Absolutely, and I can also hear it in some of the subtler stuff, like the drum performance of each is hitting similar notes of really laying hard on the accent on the cymbals and stuff like that. Trying to add kind of a multi-dimensional pulse, even when it's just like a fast thrash beat.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Oriflamme is very, especially, yeah. Like, Spite Extreming has all this pulse things going on within the thrash, and Oriflamme really relies on pulse. Like, that last sample you had some, in that first build, it had wonderful pulse stuff. Like, it seemed like the chording was patterned on that big flowing riff from before, and it was kind of preserved in it. It was really cool. But, so here, right, for listeners, you could hear that these are big chords. Da, 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 right? But you can also hear how fast it feels and how flowing it is, right? Like, you get the pickup at the end of each thing, which drops you into the next. And the funny thing is then, it picks up more when they go to the major key kind of fanfare riff. And I just want to point out that where most bands would use that as the climax, here it's the tension builder. But yeah, so Oriflamme, you can hear using somewhat similar techniques, but they use it for this more kind of stately motion. Spite Extremewing is always like, in terms of human motion, Spite Extremewing is always just like charging at someone or something, or, running around. Or driving a car really fast,
doing something cool. Yeah.
Doing something cool, yeah. Flying a fucking plane, yeah. Things like that. So you can hear that. So here's a comparative thing. I tried to pick the thing that captures the fast part, that captures the slowness and the somber quality of this music. The best. And, you know, so basically it's like, yes, but extreme wing, riff, melody. This music has some great melodies, some great riffs, but it's really oriented towards these dense, powerful textures and towards chords that, while very, in some ways very consonant and noble, have a ton of built-in tension, right? They're just, it's one of those places where you want to use, just say, yeah, it sounds dark, man. So, let's take these, so here are some big block chords sounding sick and very scary. This is from the beginning of Un Mal en Chien. Oh, wait, I think I just kept listening to that for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to get lost in this one. Well, that's interesting. You kind of chose, because I think that this song in particular is kind of the kind of the odd man out, not in a bad way, but I think that it's pretty different in some of the harmonic ideas from what you hear on the rest of the album. It's very good, but this is kind of the most Nordic sounding song on the record, I think.
Yeah, especially in that second riff. The first riff, too, though, this is all, like... what I was trying to get with this track is I think this track, although it might be the exception, it distills a tendency that runs throughout and makes it very different from some of this other kind of glorious solar stuff.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And just the rhythmic quality, right? So you can hear how that first riff is so powerful, but it's just chords until you get this kind of forceful turnaround at the end, which is still just kind of chord based, but it's I don't mean just in a bad way. We both fucking love chords.
Yeah.
But like there are these big they're just sort of sitting on these harmonic structures, right? And there is they would have a very different quality for a band going for a brighter sound or for something closer to the stuff that's commercially popular now, this sort of boiled, watered down Satanic Warmaster Sargeist stuff, or knockoffs
one of the reasons
knockoffs of the chivalric French bands, shit like that.
Well, specific to that first riff, one of the reasons that makes it so good is there is like there is like a micro art within modern black metal guitar technique, which is when you're doing the big block chord and you feather out to the open strings, like exactly how you do it, like how you're working them in, and like it's kind of like improvisational in a way. You can't have it like written out, but there needs to be a physical gesture that's the same every time.
Yes,
you know?
the physicality on this record is great. And yeah, I hear that for sure. Lots of cool resonating overtones. And then we get this cool sort of... you get this sort of darker, more Norse sounding phrase, right? Yeah, dum, dum. You know, sort of some of the only kind of sharp half-step descents on the record. And you think, oh, okay, this is just some kind of like, I don't know, what's the word, a coda or something, just some sort of like riff closing phrase, you know? You think they're just going to hang out on that for a minute and then go back into the main riff. Instead, you get the dropout, and where another band would be like, here's the hook riff. Here, we're going to give you what you really want. We're going to give you like some poppy shit or whatever. They just keep playing that riff, and it starts to really sound like a Burzum riff. And the only thing they do to draw it out more for the blast section is just, to draw it out more for this part, is they add like a little kink in the end of it to turn it around. And yeah, so super just driving, scornful. This is the most like aggressive riff on the record. This is just really angry Burzum. You had a good comparison for it.
Oh, just that it sounds like, stuff off Hivisla Sat Taras sped up, really fast. I mean, people think of Hivisla Sat Taras as like where Burzum becomes like much more accessible, which is like kind of true.
I don't think
like,
that's true.
You don't think so? I mean, I think hipsters like Hivisla Sat by now.
Yeah, because it probably sounds it's less power chord based than the earlier stuff, but it's like really dissonant and very fast and angry.
Yeah, it's very like gnarly goblin music still.
Yeah, it's not very catchy.
I mean,
like they're kind of hooks on the early Burzum.
Yeah, there's like bigger single riffs on like That's on That Gang Power or something. But then, I thought it was funny because you wrote in the notes the first riff. You said that you'll be the guy to make an improbable comparison to BBH, and I was like, no way, man. That first one is like a Brandicald riff all the way.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, no, it really is. It's like a Brandicald riff individually. Maybe I can hear that, but just also what they start doing over the Burzum riff at the end, layering on more overtones, which has to do with that high string work you were talking about, I think, although maybe another guitar part. They start layering on these really cool extra tones at the end. That's also very Blazebird Hall. I would say that in aggregate, even though this music is sort of built with this very kind of bright Southern European material, and although it has this greater immediacy and kind of much more of a structural architectonic quality to it, right? It's less airy and fluctuating. Really does feel like Canadian Blazebird Hall in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. There's I don't know, man. There's something about this.
It's just nature, more naturey than I expected.
I can see that. You see, I think of this as I don't know. This is a record that exists in a very cool intersection of a lot of different things, which is one of the things that makes it very well-rounded and very interesting to listen to repeatedly. Like, I think this is a record I'm gonna dump in, 20 listens to, and just like pick apart little guitar technique things. I think this is definitely music that had to be made by jamming it out as a whole band. There's just so many subtle idiosyncrasies that you can't really write out, like little things happening on the guitar and drums that are clearly just from playing and iterating on these songs over and over. It's got a great full band energy, despite how kind of austere it appears to be.
That's true. This is music that doesn't necessarily sound like live band music, but is. That's good.
Yes. But to wrap things up, we're going to go to the back half of the record for a song called Sacrifices with an exclamation point. We need more of that in black metal. Bring back like throwing in exclamation points in song titles. And this is very cool. So this is a 3-act song which is something that's actually going to be popping up over and over on this episode, is the sort of act-based songwriting. And the sample that I chose is going to cover the transition from the first act to the second. And the way they execute is very interesting. I mean, it's done with kind of a conventional black metal drop, but it's surprisingly transformative. What they switch to is not just more of the same, but bigger, but something substantially different harmonically. So let's give it a shot. So that ended up being kind of a long sample, but I'm just impressed with how many sort of harmonic variations they managed to pack on top of this, like, relatively straightforward power chord riff. Like, and that's another thing that's very much like Spite Extreme Wing, the control they have over different voicings of the same general melodic idea, which is one of the really strong points on this record.
That's true. Voicing is huge for SEW because they almost never, they don't really use, or if they use them, they use them very sparingly. They don't really use those chords. Like the sort of sliding budget epic chords that you get from Seigneur Voland or Sargeist or whatever. They use things that are sort of like that sometimes, but a lot of what they do is just sort of like dense, rich variations on power chords and shit.
Yeah, they're...
And you get that here, too, for sure. Like, they're not building in any fancy... They're not doing that sliding chord thing. Yeah, these riffs sound more like Seigneur Voland riffs for sure, but like they're not
on this song really, in particular.
Yeah, but they're not really using those tricks, and they are. And on the other hand, they're not doing things like that other good band, like a band like Druid or something, right? Throws all these crazy notes in the chords. None of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think what's cool is that a lot of these songs, I mean, these are pretty long songs. These are all about 8 to 10 minutes long. And if you really break it down and you kind of interpret it conservatively, there's only like 3 or 4 riffs on every one. But there's half a dozen variations to every single one of those. And a lot of the time, it'll be 3 variations in a row over the same basic chord structure, but you don't really notice it while it's happening because their grasp of, like, the harmonic language and their voicings are so rich. It feels like something completely new every time.
Yeah, I mean, that is really good.
This is a little one Gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
So yeah, no, like when, at the beginning of COVID, WWE had to continue. So they were cutting promos, and, doing their, matches just in, like, empty rings and empty stadiums and stuff.
Whoa. Yeah.
So I remember there was this video that got kind of viral for a little bit where it was like John Cena cutting a promo for this other guy, I forget his name, but he's like a voodoo guy from the swamps of Louisiana, like modern witchcraft shit.
Very Mortal Kombat.
Very Mortal Kombat, yeah, it's fucking sick. And so it's this incredibly dramatic promo, but it's, as opposed to all the others, you used to hearing crowd noise. Now it's dead silent. So, everybody, shared it as being like, oh, this is like really surreal and funny, but I was like, oh no, this reveals it as very traditional theater, in a way.
Oh, it's like, yeah, pro wrestling as like Greek tragedy or something.
Yeah, and it's like, it totally makes sense.
You just see him out there acting, and it's purely kind of symbolic. Is there any sound for it, or is the whole thing silent? Like, can we hear John Cena and this other
Yeah,
dude?
no, he's speaking, yeah, but it's like, it's purely like it's like an oratory on a stage in this vast empty space. It's so sick, dude.
That's pretty cool. Yes, I agree. All right, well, should we...
Are we going to talk about heavy metal? Do we have to do that?
Yeah, I suppose we should probably tell the people how we got on this tangent. So,
we got on it because...
we're back with Auspicious Atavism by Anahata. We were just talking about these guys' majestic promo photos, which are the 2 main dudes in the band wearing chainmail coifs and aviators. With no shirt under it.
I mentioned to the black metal guy that is literally just the look of the legendary Scott Steiner from the WWF. There's no way. You looked up the pictures. There's no way that it's not patterned off that, right?
No, that's literally Scott Steiner, yeah. So that's pretty cool. So who the heck are these dudes? Well, one is named Johan with an I, pretty cool, and the other's named Kyle. And Johan, we know from the Terminus Code Prosperity Sphere as the guy behind Soldier Tower, the utterly demented Grail Quest sort of neo-folk punk black project that either has done a release or is going to do a release on Old Mill. Definitely Old Mill associated.
I think Old Mill re-released the demo. Yeah, he was on a comp, but then Old Mill also re-released the demo, and I think they're going to do more stuff going forward. I think Soldier Tower is secretly my favorite thing on Old Mill. It's so fucking cool, dude.
Soldier Tower is sick, right? So, Soldier Tower has the unique virtue of being sort of having unhinged passion. And the other guy is a guy named Kyle, who I saw what he was in, and it rang a bell. This guy was in a project called Isobrute back in the day that I just, like, it was just a name. I could never remember the name, but it sort of stuck in the back of my head as a cool thing. It was kind of like, I think he was coming out of that Victoria, BC kind of, never mind. He was in Nova Scotia. My bad. Fuck.
But then into BC and Vancouver, yeah.
Yeah, but Vancouver, which is different from Victoria, which is a lesson I learned from Altered Dead. But anyway, he had this thing that was kind of like crusty heathen war metal. It was unusual. It was like stenchcore and pagan black metal aesthetics or something like that. And I haven't even.
So it's
really
your dream
back.
band.
Exactly. I haven't.
Graveland plus Deviated Instinct is the ultimate black metal band.
I mean, honestly, I've sort of tried to make music like that, as you know. But
Yeah.
he, it was. I haven't even gone back and listened to it. I just bookmarked it in my head as something I needed to check out and then forgot about. But anyway, this guy was in a pretty sick band called Brute, and I think a more sort of like successful band called Harrow, I think, back in the day, or more like just more full band thing. That was a one man project. Harrow's a long running thing. Okay, and it's Harrow that was from Victoria. But so they've both got some background in the Canadian black metal scene. This is thoroughly informed by the spirit of black metal, especially this modern kind of solar black metal with the chivalric feel, which we were just discussing with our review of the Oriflamme. And yet, it is basically power metal, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of splits the difference between. Well, I mean, it's always been a pretty narrow difference, right? The difference between traditional heavy metal and power metal. I would say that this kind of fits right into the niche of. We've talked about on the show a couple times, like USPM, like the kind of burlier, more mid-paced cousin of power metal, as we understand it at least.
Yeah. Certainly, Manowar a big influence here.
And Jagdpanzer, which I guess you've kind of developed a passion for recently, haven't you?
Oh yeah, dude, you got me into Jagdpanzer. Like you said you've been telling me about him for years, but you really brought him up when we were reviewing the Panakita last year. You played a sick Jagdpanzer riff. And,
yeah.
For whatever reason, I went back to it recently, and to Ample
so
Destruction, is that it? It's fucking sick. Like
that's
like
the first record is Ample Destruction, yeah.
But yeah, so some relationship to all that, although I think the closest relationship probably to very new, contemporary sort of revivalist power metal, which we'll get into. But also, all informed by the black metal background, so this is kind of at least moving towards the thing that I was talking about Cromlech with in that interview, which is this idea of extreme heavy metal as extreme metal. Right? Mm-hmm. Cromlech comes out of the epic doom scene. They share members with Into Oblivion, and they're kind of making this Solstice-style epic doom, but sped up. A lot more of the kind of Manowar thing, and then a lot of Black and Death creeping into it around the edges, right? But we've heard a lot over the last year, really, of Black and Death metal bands getting back into just sort of like primary color trad heavy metal.
Yeah.
And like, so the Panakita record, or even I think we could say Mongrel's Cross, even though in some ways that's a black thrash or black metal record, that it really is very heavy metal, right?
It's very heavy metal. I mean, same with, I think we were saying that about the Honternos that we covered just the other day. There's a lot of like trad metal on that.
Very good point. So yeah, in some sense, maybe extreme heavy metal cuts across a lot of different genres at this point. But this is definitely headed in that direction, and this is really pretty fucking cool, right?
Oh, this is a wonderful album. I really love this. I think as far as kind of, I don't even want to say revivalist, because that implies that the objective is to recreate something. This is just a good heavy metal record, full stop.
Oh yeah, no, this itself is not revivalist, and they're trying to do some new stuff here, I think.
Oh, definitely.
Extreme metal kind of proximity. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you talking about the extreme metal proximity, because I think that's not necessarily like a blind spot of yours, but kind of a blind spot of a lot of people, which is, okay, so you've got some younger guys, I assume they're probably our age or younger, doing a kind of traditional heavy metal project. Mm-hmm. I mean, they weren't locked in a closet their whole lives. I mean, they know what death and black metal is. They know these things. And as we can see, these guys are coming from a black metal background. And I think the secret is probably most of the guys doing this kind of music nowadays are coming from that background. We talk about the difference between, or we don't so much, but there's a kind of a soft designation between kind of traditional metal and extreme metal. And we think of extreme metal as modern, or at least more modern than traditional metal. But I
superior to some might say.
Yeah, it's superior to. Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part that's correct. At least for people in our wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. But like I said, people who are playing this style, this sort of traditional style, have not been locked in a closet the whole time. They've been listening to all this stuff. And I think at this point, the positions have kind of swapped. Extreme metal is the default place of metal music now.
That's right.
Yeah, some sort of black or death metal or something just very abrasive is the default position. So now, going to something like this is sort of the unusual take, whereas in the past it would be considered, oh, you're the weird guy for going into this. I mean, now you're the weird guy for coming out of it.
Okay, so what's the blind spot? Are you just saying that I got it backwards? Instead of saying taking heavy metal towards extreme metal, it's more like these guys are in some sense coming from extreme metal and just making a heavy metal record?
I wouldn't even say. I mean, blind spot's probably. Yeah, I mean that's an overly harsh term, but I think that just the idea that a lot of people have that it's like, oh well, these guys are doing heavy metal informed by advances in extreme metal over the past 20 years. It's like, well, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't they? There's no reason not to. I think the blind spot that a lot of people have is thinking that it's this entirely linear process where no one would go back and apply these lessons to this originating style.
Oh, well, I don't think that. That's what I was suggesting. It's, but yeah, this is, pretty, I mean, yeah, so it's like, but the extreme metal, it should be said, I think with the tracks I initially clicked on, I got more of the extreme metal flourishes, right? Mm-hmm. And this is, in many respects, musically closer to much closer to a down the line power metal album than something like Cromlech, right? Or
yes, yeah, I'd agree with that.
And it's tapping into certain kinds of classic heavy metal things like big verse, like embrace of verse chorus, big hooks, memorable quote unquote pop relative to extreme metal standards, songwriting, right? Mm-hmm. Things like that, right? Sing-along choruses. So, I guess, should we just show them?
Yeah, fuck it. I've got a sample off the first track after the intro. This is called Imperium. And I only wrote down the note that I had to, which was, haha, big Jag-Panzer riff go, dun 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 dun, and that the chorus was sick. So, let's see it.
All right.
Decomposed, blood caked and opposed to the deep and dark demonic fight that threw him into the endless
king, I am the hero. Yeah, fuck. Oh, yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. So a couple interesting things. So one thing that I want to stress is that clearly these guys are very smart songwriters, very informed by advancements in modern black and death and extreme metal, but they do a lot of things that are extremely traditional songwriting techniques of the like original kind of NWOBHM era. Like, for instance, one thing I want to draw attention to is the presence of a pre-chorus, which is something that's completely forgotten nowadays. That whoa section immediately before the chorus. And then they do a head fake at the end of this sample where they do the pre-chorus, you're expecting it again. But no, it goes into a drop and then it switches acts.
Oh, they
so
do
to
that
speak.
a couple times on this record. They actually do that on the next sample, too.
Yeah, they like to do these kind of head fake things. Additionally, in the chorus itself, they get to the end of it, and then they do it again. You know? The chorus is a full 2 repetitions of this entire block of music, because, yes, this is unashamedly the centerpiece of the song. This is, you know, it's a song about finding different routes to this giant moment. And, you know, at a certain point, you get really into extreme metal, and you're like, oh, you know, verse, chorus, I'm trying to get away from it. But these guys prove that there's a reason songs are made like that, because they can have an incredible power to them when executed correctly.
Yeah. Okay. Also, that was... So, also, tidbit. The chorus is... and this we'll get into. I can talk about it more at the end. But this record is steeped in a very deep sense of, you know, sort of like Indo-European lore, right? As sort of myth, epic, religion, spanning over a long historical time frame. And this is the chorus includes a word that nobody will know. I am the king, I am the hero light. My long life burns for the blood of demon kind. Well, what the fuck is that? And I didn't know when I saw it.
What,
but
hero
I looked
light?
it up, and I... What?
What was it, Hero Light?
Long light. Yeah. So it's yes, so it's basically the same thing as hero light, exactly, but it's the Lonlaith. I googled it and it came up on a Vassar website, somebody's translation of the Tainboke Helen from Gaelic. So this is this person translates it as champion light. I've also heard it as hero light or god light or whatever. This
That's fucking sick, bro.
Yeah, so I was looking for it in my translation, but I'll just read it off the Vassar thing. So the Tainboke Helen is also called the cattle raid of Ulster, and it is the tale of sort of the Irish Achilles, Cuchulainn,
Okay.
sorry. I think there would be different ways of pronouncing it, but people today say Cuchulainn. And he's known as the Hound of Ulster. And, you know, the tale involves his training, his great struggles, and his death in a glorious fight. And it has this kind of, if you think the Iliad is like ancient sounding, this is like sheer reptile brain, primordial mythic imagination. It's like some of the shit in the Cattle Raid of Ulster is like almost closer to Dragon Ball Z than anything you'd imagine from.
It's like Sviatogor type shit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Of like
yeah.
hyper primitive elemental.
Yeah. Or like the Kalevala is like this. But there's lots of it left over in the Iliad. But in the Iliad, you get basically a similar moment. You see light gleam from Achilles' head right when he's about to go. Right when he's going to be hit with Lyssa, his wrath, right, heroic wrath, and go on a tear. Here, right, we get Cuchulainn. The long light stood out of his forehead so that it was as long and as thick as a warrior's whetstone, as high, as thick, as strong, as steady, as long as the sail tree of some huge prime ship was the straight spout of dark blood which arose right on high from the very ridgepole of his crown, so that a black fog of witchery was made thereof, like to the smoke from a king's hostel, what time the king comes to be ministered to at nightfall of a winter's day.
Bro, I've got the weirdest boner right now.
Yeah, when now this contortion had been completed in Cuchulainn, then it was that the hero of valor sprang into his scythed war chariot with its iron sickles, its thin blades, its hooks, and its hard spikes, with its hero's foreprongs, with its opening fixtures, with its stinging nails that were fastened to the poles and thongs and bows and lines of the chariot.
I'm fully turgid now.
Fully, yes, throbbing. And the funny thing is, that's basically what's being described. So they describe I've heard it is described as things like, the light shining around his head, but here the hero's light is really linked to also this gout of blood out of his forehead. I can't tell entirely whether, I've heard them, maybe they're the same thing. But with something like the Iliad or something, you'll get as this, blaze of heavenly light. Cuchulainn becomes physically monstrous when he goes berserk. And there's all sorts of cool shit. Highly recommended. Really, really underrated. So that is a cool deep cut reference that I actually didn't notice till just now. And that'll tell you something about the vibe they're going for here.
Yeah, they're actually serious about it.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, let's go on. So,
all right. Let's fucking do it. Let's fucking do it, bro.
Let's fucking do it. So I'll keep spurging out, but we'll go to Strength Through Steel. I'd say, on the whole, this is the best song on the record, at least to me.
This is at least the big single. Yeah, this is the one that everybody should be jamming.
And I think every element of their sound is firing here. So you get glorious melodies, these sort of soaring independent vocal lines that aren't just wedded to the root or are welded to it in a cool way. And you get just ultimate, this band is so good at stupid smart. The lyrics they often seem like fantasy. The lyrics to the last one could sound like Diablo. The lyrics to this one could sound like, any sort of fantasy thing or like Dark Souls or something.
Should this? I'm gonna make a challenging call right here. Mm-hmm. Should this? I mean, we've normally associated this with certain kinds of black metal, but should Strength Through Steel be the jam of Sword Boy Summer?
Bro, it might be. Yeah,
it might be the jam of Sword Boy Summer.
Oh, it's literally 100%. About a sword. But basically, behind these lyrics that are sort of written in this sort of big, bold, seemingly sort of dumb in a good way, right? Lyrics. There's just this deep knowledge of ancient lore. So you get the Volsung saga here. You'll get King Arthur more. Let's learn about the son of the blacksmith, or the adopted son of the blacksmith.
Dude, the lyrics on this are so good.
Yes.
Let's go. So black metal guy, I've got a, I'm sure you're going to bring it up, but I want to ask, I think, a vital question. If you're going to make neo-traditional heavy metal, why shouldn't it have blast beats and harsh vocals?
No, I agree. Yeah,
I don't see, like you listen to that, you'll hear the harsh vocals and the blast beat, and it feels completely contiguous with everything else. It does not feel like a dip into black metal, even though, instrumentally, I guess.
What you mean. I get what you mean.
But
yeah.
it doesn't make it feel like a black heavy metal song. It's still
That's kind of what I mean by the extreme heavy metal thing. It's just really, it's heavy metal, but it's really extreme. I mean, you could say that in the 80s, something like Jag Panzer already was that.
Yeah.
Like Jag Panzer hits for me in the way that, like, not exactly the same way, obviously, but, like, Jag Panzer, like, Iron Maiden to me is sort of fun, goofy music, right? Like, Jag Panzer hits more like Celtic Frost.
I gotcha.
And this is, while still having the things that are awesome about Maiden, right? And, like, this is, but I hear what you mean. Yes, this is fundamentally heavy metal, and you make it with what you've got at hand. There's always a point to, like, a certain kind of meticulous revivalism, but that's better done in black and death metal and hardcore. A lot of the traditional heavy metal stuff we have now that's very focused on retro is all pastiche. It's very superficial, and it's all about, and we'll get into that in a sec. But so the idea that this band sees what they're doing as, like, they're not trying to, like, throw back, right? They're not
at all.
They're trying to make music that hits people today as heavy metal, and they're using the weapons that come to hand.
No, that was the thing I was going to say. It's I hate, it's sort of a natural part of the territory of discussing stuff like this. But when I say heavy metal revival or, like, neo heavy metal, I really shouldn't be saying that. This is a heavy metal record. It is as applicable in 85 as it is today. I mean, the technology to create these songs may have changed, may have been informed by advancements from elsewhere in the greater metal scene, but I can't listen to that blast beat and see it as anything other than real traditional heavy metal,
Yeah. So, let's start talking about that then. Yeah. And so this is a thing that the guys in Cromlech were sort of griping about. These sort of like ironic retro metal bands, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so an interesting thing about this band is one reason it has the massive pop catchiness it does is the influence of Visigoth. Mm-hmm. I think if you had to pick one band that this really sounds like throughout, it would be Visigoth. A lot of our viewers or listeners are, and not much to look at. A lot of our listeners may not even be familiar with it. It's really popular. It's become, like, very mainstream, Metal Blade Records kind of shit. But they were on the earlier wave of this kind of new wave of British heavy metal / power metal revivalism. Sounds more power metal-y. And in a lot of ways, they're really good at what they do. It's extremely catchy. It's kind of heartfelt. Really skillful songwriting in a lot of places. And the way this guy constructs his hooks in the choruses are, like, almost, I'm going to need you to cut for a sec so I can find an appropriate sample, because I forgot, but, like,
sure.
Very closely parallels some of the patterns that the Visigoth guy writes. The difference being that this guy's a better singer. The Visigoth guy is sort of like, he's got a powerful, untrained kind of low baritone voice or something, right? This guy's just got pipes. Johan in Anahata. And he's got a great range of styles. And so I'm gonna get us a reference sample from Visigoth, and I'm gonna say the Visigoth influence throughout for this is a strength for this band. But it's also a limitation, which I'll get into at the end. And so we'll talk about this after the sample.
We are the voices of steel in the night. We are the warrior. We are the sorcerer. And our magic will light up the sky. Take a chance, roll the dice. This is hell of paradise. In this land of harassment to conquer pace. Forgotten realms and excel of unholy beneath the spell. He's the master of the evil in the deep. He's the dungeon master. He's the dungeon master. He's the dungeon master. He's the dungeon. Fear the dungeon. Slay the dungeon master.
Yeah, you could hear that, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. No, I think Visigoth have basically become the biggest guys in this sort of thing right now.
For sure, yeah, and you can hear why, right? Like, that's ridiculously catchy. And irresistible, right? If you don't like Visigoth, if you can't at least appreciate Visigoth, you probably don't like metal, right?
Yeah.
That's a good way of, there's this kind of like punk scene guy who like mostly only likes black metal, which is totally fine. That's what I used to be. But liking Visigoth will prove whether you like metal or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also... it's also, for those who don't know, Visigoth, the connection to things that maybe our listeners know more is one of the main guys from Visigoth is also one of the dudes from Caladan Brood. And I would argue that Caladan Brood, summoning, all that stuff, has a huge thread connecting it to trad metal. So
yeah, sure.
It's not that far off.
Yeah, so there's a thing that the Visigoth guy does, which is that he rounds off his choruses in this very, like, everything resolves in this kind of big whole step, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, he's a dungeon master, there are these big kind of, payoff hook turnarounds, and this guy uses those in Anahata. He uses that method. You could hear him doing that on Strength Through Steel, and there it sounds really good, in part because it's a little more restrained. But the thing with Visigoth, right, is if you listen to too much of it, your teeth will rot.
Oh yeah,
it's extremely sugary music, and it relates to those kinds of big flourishing pop gestures, so that's like the risk of this kind of music is that you could accidentally spill, Visigoth often accidentally spills there, and then the risk of being influenced by Visigoth is that you can accidentally go in that direction yourself. There are not that many, there are few if any examples of that per se on this record, but it's a sort of an inbuilt risk.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And I'll come back to the Visigoth stuff and the sort of pastiche heavy metal thing at the end.
Well, if I can indulge in some really obnoxious kind of musician-y stuff, the reason it doesn't happen for Anahata is because they're doing actually a very traditional Iron Maiden technique at the end of the choruses, which is to do a half measure fill at the end, or a full measure fill, which, it's usually, an elongated drum fill and kind of a lead guitar fill that brings it back to the verse. And what that allows them to do is to create a bigger difference in key, to connect the verse and the chorus than would typically be available. They're creating this small bridge space which allows them to explore bigger gulfs between the melodic sensibilities of the two. It just gives them more space to work with than Visigoth.
I think I get what you mean. Like, this band does key changes, and when they do key changes, the key changes are big and very and it's like, yes, I hear what you mean. Okay.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
I mean, kind of bridging off that in my next sample, I'll get to another technique they use a lot, which is something that's kind of forgotten. I just want to play something off Son of Fate, off the back half of the record. So, like I was talking about with the Oriflamme record, most of these songs are 2 or 3 act pieces. And the sample that I've got here is, like the Oriflamme sample I played, talking about the same thing, the transition between Act 1 and Act 2. And what happens here is very important because there is an actual tempo change. Not to be confused with a half timing sort of geometric thing that a lot of people do all the time. There's a full-fledged BPM change between these two sections here. Which is, again, that's a very traditional kind of Iron Maiden or Judas Priest thing to do, but it's a very difficult thing to pull off and make it feel natural, so a lot of people just skip it. And these guys didn't. And when you hear how it lurches into this slower tempo after this first part, announcing the transition to Act 2 of this song, I think you'll like it a lot.
Shining brightest, chocolate sun. Whoa, An ancient power fade, a serpent god again, a flame of deceiving light, whispers from the weeping wood, a red light within the cold, within the cold. Fade, 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 oh, what is fade? Fade, 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 oh, fickle flame. Down, 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 I fall and break. Fade, 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 oh, fickle flame. Down, 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 I
So at the end of that sample, where the solo kicks in over that very kind of delicate arpeggiated riff, that is one of the most black metal moments on the record to me. Because that is that's extremely similar to something that a band like Plaga would do. You've got this very delicate, kind of folky, kind of trad metal riff, and then this explosive, very over-the-top solo emerges over it. And the dichotomy between the relative delicacy and subtlety of the riff and just the florid, over-the-top quality of the solo makes for a really interesting mixture. And, no, I really love that part, and obviously we gotta talk about the tempo change, because that's just not a thing you hear anymore.
Yeah, that was accomplished very smoothly. And
Yeah.
once they got into that lower tempo, they were able to go through a lot of pretty rapid and subtle changes leading up to that big chorus at the end. For a record that's often in kind of a big strutting open power chord mode, or sort of like pedal point chug mode, it's pretty interesting to hear a graceful passage like that. And certainly, I didn't remember that off the first listen, because obviously I was focusing on the big sword riffs. But this is, this part's really cool. I'm glad you picked it.
No, it's very smart, very subtle songwriting, and I mean that's one of the big strengths of this band. And also, I noticed, going through this again, they were using the half measure or full measure fill to adjoin two verse riffs there. I think that's like one of their standard techniques, is like, we want to move in a very different direction with the next riff. The typical, for instance, black metal technique would be drop out solo guitar, bring it back in with a bunch of energy. Here, it's just like, let's just extend it and find a way to manipulate this fill into melodically joining these passages, which is something that extreme metal people could take ideas from. Because at this point, it's a classic technique, but dropping out with a solo channel guitar, I'm almost tired of it at this point. Let's find
that's
a more
one of your
elaborate
favorite things.
Oh yeah, I do it on like every song I've ever written. but even I know it's like, oh, that's kind of the easy choice. Let's make it a little more musical. Let's make it a little more put together. And I like how they consistently use the harder option that requires a little more thought to transition between disparate ideas.
Yeah, so, all right. Coming to the last sample. This one is hierophany. This is late in the record. So hierophany is like revelation of the sacred. Right? You could think of it as appearance of the god. So there's a heroic narrative being woven throughout this record. So we're getting to the, it's hierophany, and then finally we're at death of a hero at the end, and that's more of a kind of dungeon synthy track. So like, this is another highlight to me. This is probably the most black metal track on the record. If you were to evaluate it as black metal, right, you would say the riffing is a little thin. However, this is black metal being used in heavy metal, and what it's doing is very effectively supporting just... I can't even count how many sick vocal hooks are in this. And just very forceful. So this is a really cool track, and at the end I'll talk about the unexpected influence here.
Thousands in droves towards the end, like curtain creeds long since dead. Yet here I stand, out of past into man. I sing for those who lost their time. I sing for the days to come. I sing for a beautiful end, and there in a righteous beginning. Trojans and Romans have long since been called. Now only the embers remain. Servants and slaves are raised in the game. Spartans and Hittites, the Teutonic night. Come, the neon bronze age has only now just begun. Neon bronze age plunges into the heart of the all-lonely snake.
So what this guy is doing here is difficult and cool, which is he's flowing freely from cleans into harsh vocals, and the harsh vocals are a kind of deep roar, right? A vocal that you would associate more with, like Venom type stuff, or the 80s stenchcore bands, like Amoebics or anything like that. But really, I think it's Nemthianga, who I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. It's Alan Averill from Primordial.
Okay.
And this guy has a bit of a deeper voice, but he's doing the same technique where you move from a kind of rough clean into a full-on harsh vocal. And, the harsh vocal has some melodic inflection to it, and it's being bellowed rather than like black metal screamed.
It is a harsh vocal that is at an actual note. There is a pitch to it.
Yes, yeah, there's a rich sound quality to it. And the whole song kind of works like that. The slide into the blasting is a very late Primordial thing. The underground has almost totally forgotten about Primordial, which is a thing that I'd like to talk more about at some point. And it actually took me a long time to come back to them, only really recently. In part, that's because their later stuff, right, it exists in this kind of Metal Blade realm of big festival metal. The writing gets a lot more heavy metal. A lot of it's still good. But like this band is like drawing on the heavy metal Primordial in a very intentional way. And I think that's cool. And certainly Averill's lyrics and the whole mood of that band blend into this very nicely.
Well, yeah, because it's just Irish folk amoebics.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. What is Primordial?
Yeah.
A little bit. I would bet Alan liked amoebics for sure. I've been going back and listening to the old stuff. It's actually, it's remarkable. It's like, I thought they were influenced by Druid. I think they influenced Druid.
Dude, I will tell you right now, I don't have evidence, but I'm going to call him out right here. Alan Averill probably has an Arise tramp stamp.
Yeah, I hear what you mean. Certainly those are closely connected. So yeah, this band seems to have knowledge of both of those things, which is cool. Even the little subtext of crust in the vocals is sick, and very at variance from the general sort of squeaky clean, lawful good orientation of this music, right? Yeah, so here's... Do you have a summary thought? If not, I do.
I mean, one of my hot takes is just that I think this is going to become a huge style over the next 5 years. And if I want to do a hotter, more specific take that people can really place bets on, I bet a lot of, like, neo-Instagram raw black metal kids are going to suddenly find a passion for, like, traditional heavy metal.
God save us.
Specifically because a lot of it's going to be made with ingredients from black metal. Which are, in a lot of cases, just heavy metal ingredients, but 2 steps removed. But I think this is going to become a big thing. I mean, these guys right here should be on a really big label right now.
Yeah, they won't because it's too crazy. And because of the sheer intensity of the mythological warrior lyrics. And so, let us get into that. So, interesting thing about Visigoth being the influence here, right? Visigoth themselves are like the ultimate like postmodern heavy metal band. They're like, the music feels like bright, shiny plastic, right? Or like candy. Visigoth is like, they're a great band, but there's something ephemeral and now about it, despite the retroness, which is the interesting thing. It has this quality of, it all refers back to this old USPM, but that stuff was all like rough. Like, listen to the just like raw virility and aggression in Jagdpanzer, or just like the chunky, like technically differently abled power chords in Manila Road or whatever, right? Like those bands had a kind of totally different energy, a much punkier energy, right? Everything in Visigoth is like this mid-heavy, sterile sound quality. Very satisfying to hear at first. It'll just get old, right? It's this sort of it's music that references old school, but in fact has a lot to do with just like melodeath and like 90s and early 2000s power metal that you'd know better than me, right? Even though it's all 80s referential. And lyrically what they have is like everything is at like a couple steps removed from the source. So instead of being a metal band that's influenced by fantasy, Visigoth's lyrics are sort of like about nerd culture and about metal culture. Like that song I sampled before, Dungeon Master, was literally about D&D. So like it's where you could contrast that meaningfully with this band, where they are going directly to the source, right? More than almost anything, right? They're going, they are going directly to primary epic and to like myth and ancient religious ritual, and that's all filtered through tropes of fantasy, which is in turn filtered through video game stuff, right? But all in a way that sort of honestly expresses like these new forms that have accumulated after the old forms, right? And that allows people from our time a passage back to the old stuff, right? So Anahata has this really sophisticated and sincere negotiation with these things. Visigoth has this kind of cheeky, one-step removed, ironic posture that the dudes in... I assume Cromlech was talking about bands like that at the end of the interview, or in many places during the interview, when they talk about revivalist heavy metal bands. It's not to say that Visigoth aren't sincere. Like, they're very sincere, right? They absolutely love this shit, and I'm sure they sound like great dudes, right? But, like, there's a kind of... It's ironic not in the sense of insincerity or snark, but in the sense of very self-conscious, right? And so, like, the question then, I mean, the tough question that I would pose for this band is, okay, the Visigoth influence makes sense. It's a strength of the band. It's a thing that any modern band doing this has to reckon with, right? But given that you want to create this music of much greater depth, right? Why produce the record like Visigoth? Right? Why give it that, like, highly, like, all too modern, mid-heavy, glossy sound? Why draw so heavily on the sound of, like, Visigoth? And I assume also stuff like Summerlands and Eternal Champion. I like the Summerlands record a lot. But, you know, why draw so heavily on that? Like, it makes sense that they're responding to these, and they probably just really like those bands, so, you know. But, like... I feel like this band can and should draw on a deeper well. And, like, I would love this to sound more like Jagdpanzer, or, like, more like Primordial. And another thing I've been obsessed with recently, like, really obsessed with, is Ares Kingdom. Which is, although it's sort of black thrash war metal, is, like, very heavy metal. And I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I think, I want the music... to have the I want the music to what I want is immaterial. I think the music would be stronger if it conveyed not just the sheen and gloss of this modern sound, but let's say the sheer insanity of a column of blood bursting out of Cohellan's forehead.
Run the fire, falls a man, there ain't no one
right, we're back after some traditional heavy metal. So we're going to go to the exact opposite of the spectrum, which is great because me and my wife have been playing Resident Evil 8 now that it's out. We were both very excited for it, and we are, unsurprisingly, absolutely fixated on the very tall mommy vampire, and now we have the soundtrack for her, which is Midnight Betrothed with Dreamless, out on Atrocity Altar and Northern Silence. So this is... Okay, so the description of this, as people will expect, is lo-fi kind of dungeon synthy symphonic black metal, but what it really sounds like is anime soundtrack and video game soundtrack music with a sort of raw black aesthetic tied to it. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, completely. I mean, basically with a raw black aesthetic sort of awkwardly grafted onto it, right? It's just anime soundtrack.
It really is total anime soundtrack music, yeah. But I kind of like that, though. You know, I understand your misgivings about this, and I think they're fair, but I think they're fair, but I also think a slight adjustment of expectations or perspective helps a lot when it comes to music like this.
I do that too much on this show already. For this, I'm putting my foot down.
You're putting your foot down on this.
I'm putting my fucking foot down. We can get it. I mean, for what it is, it's quite good, I would say. Like, the anime side, it's like nice anime soundtrack music, you know?
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I think we've arrived at a point where in black metal, especially raw black metal, anime soundtrack music is kind of like part of that, at least like modern raw tape black stuff, you know?
I think certainly we got a lot of that in the Kekta Rock, but the...
oh, yeah.
I think the influence of it is one thing. That makes sense. You know, yeah, black metal people like anime, they like video games, what you gonna do, right? And especially of this generation, right? That's totally fine, but, I mean... You know, to me, it's, this would be better without the black metal parts. It's, I find the rawness highly artificial. You can tell it's digital and it's been sort of layered on. Yeah. The vocals are half-hearted, clearly not the center of it. And, you know, sure, there's some blast beats and there's some guitars playing their root notes in the background. I just don't understand why you would want to associate it with black metal or even dungeon synth. And to me, it feels this is not the best of anime or video game soundtrack, both of which are capable of this kind of unexpected profundity.
I get that, and I saw that in your notes. I get that. Yeah, no, I saw that in your notes, and you know. You would kind of ask these rhetorical questions of why do music like this? Why have the artificial rawness? Why have the harsh vocals? Why have this or that? These markers of extreme metal. And that's a fair question to ask. And I would say, I feel like the answer, at least for me, and you can take this or not, is it might be simpler than you expect. For me, at least, it's like, I like the timbre of those sounds. I like how raw black metal sounds. I like how kind of like goblin-y, harsh vocals sound. So a lot of these are very conventional pop melodies. I mean, the majority of them are, although I think there's a real harmonic depth to this music. And it's like, why do I listen to this instead of pop music? Just because those tones really appeal to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the part that really appeals to you are the Vanessa Carlton melodies. That's what the selling point here is. And to me, I feel like maybe there's it doesn't sound actually raw. Like, it sounds like raw tape black, which is not raw black metal, right? It doesn't sound like a dude throwing down in a shed and recording live by himself. It doesn't sound like four dudes in a shed recording live by themselves. There's nothing organic about this.
I get that, but I think that, like, well, why
And
do
there's
I
nothing
listen
difficult. There's nothing difficult about the rawness either. That was, this is descended from Vothana core, right? The whole idea of Vothana is that it has this, why they're so wildly popular is that it has these elaborate, sugary melodies, highly sentimental melodies that are, kind of like, I think in the context it's supposed to sound like early 20th century military music and symphonic stuff a little bit. But like,
what it actually sounds like is anime and video game soundtrack.
For sure. And the reason Vothana is cool, I think maybe a little overrated, but cool, is the dissonance between that and the, the extraordinarily raw sound, the dissonant grinding riffs, and shall we say the extraordinarily aggressive lyrical themes. And I think a lot of people are really into Vothana because it has this kind of push and pull between those things. This, you can hear how there's an evolutionary process where we come around to the end and all we've got are the big sugary pop melodies. And I think we're here now, and I think, like, this is, for a lot of people, this is just a pretext to listen to pop music, which is listen to pop music.
I think that I agree with that in a large part. I mean, obviously, to make it clear to people, it's like, I like Vothana a lot more than you. I like a lot of this. I mean, people already know. I like a lot of this sugary kind of blackened pop, for lack of a better term, more than you. That's really what it is. It's blackened pop music. But I think you can't discount, like, the timbre so easily. It's like, the reason I choose to listen to this rather than Vanessa Carlton is because I have a legitimate, like, deep-seated affection to highly distorted, thin guitars and grumbling goblin vocals, which is something that isn't provided.
I have a deep-seated affection for Vanessa Carlton. Ding, 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 ding.
Making my way downtown, that's her.
She was cute back in the day, yeah.
All right, so fuck it. Let's play some anime soundtrack raw tape black. All right, gonna go right to the first track off this, A Snow-Crested Heart, and is this like a tradition for Terminus at this point to create a short story around the sample?
Yeah, for sure.
So we'll play this, and I'll do my my goofy story about it. So, A Snow-Crested Heart from the top. Let's do it. All right, so one thing we can't say, no matter how divergent our opinions of this music are, this guy can really play piano.
Yes, that is one of the distinguishing features here. I assume it's a synth piano he's playing, but he can play piano as piano. Yeah, for sure. And that certainly immediately sets it. You can't say this is low on musicality, right? In terms of sheer, a lot of stuff in this general niche is just a complete non-entity to me, right? This is like, this guy is not like taking other people's samples and stitching them together to make dungeons. He's playing music, and he's got a very good ear for this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinguishing feature of this music, is that this is a guy who really has, like, deep compositional chops. I mean, you may not like the way he's directing it, but clearly this guy...
He's using his powers for evil, or for
He's
good.
using his powers for evil. But, so, gotta do the Terminus story for A Snow-Crested Heart. To which I wrote, you can see it immediately. The high school protagonist walking home through the rain as the credits roll. His best friend from elementary school, who is, of course, his love interest, waves to him, but he doesn't walk with her. This is his time to be alone. He's not sure if he wants to apply to a Tokyo university, but the question in his mind is of inherent value. He is questioning his role in the world around him. Should he become a salaryman, or pursue his passion as a professional Dungeons & Dragons dungeon master? Only time will tell.
Well, shit, bro. Now I just want to wrap up the show and get back to rewatching Evangelion.
No, it's like, it's definitely, I mean, we talked about, like, you brought up Kekta Rock before, which I think is relevant, because I mentioned on the, that last song that we totally diverged on, that I really liked and you hated, that I was like, oh, this guy's listening to emo hip-hop. 100%.
Yeah, emo hip-hop, the worst genre ever conceived in the world. How could you...
The best genre ever conceived. The ultimate realization of all music. Excuse me. No, but I think this guy's probably listening to, like, emo hip-hop, too. You know, this is not black metal in any way. This is a different kind of music using a black metal aesthetic as a sort of starting point to create an idea. This has...
I think a starting point to create an album cover, man. Like, we'll go to my sample, because there are parts on this that are, I mean, to me, genuinely enjoyable. So we'll go to, he's really good at what he does, and there can be a winning quality to it, right? It's just like, look, okay, you like anime soundtracks, you have a feel, okay, this is good. So we'll go to, Bygone Fortunes. a nice kind of sentimental pirate melody, right? And then you get this sort of you switched these samples around. This makes sense. Okay, I was looking for the sentimental pirate melody is on Stop Visiting My Grave. But like there's another one that has that. But then you get this really this piano build, which to me is like maybe the biggest melody on the record. I
didn't even realize I had like swapped it because we had like adjoining samples. But
no, it makes sense, bro. It makes sense that you did. This is just okay. Inside view and Terminus method. We have a notes and we move it around. Anyway, so like in some sense, I would say this is almost the most black metal part, which is that you get this these rising sort of piano arpeggios that turn very minor key. And then you get some sort of interesting, within the context of this, kind of jarring chord changes that are not quite chromatic, but really high tension, and maybe involve a key change. I don't know. I'm too ignorant to explain. But you get some maneuvers that are actually drawn from classical music and that could evoke stuff like Emperor or whatever, right?
I think I'll take the jump and say this guy is probably classically trained.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I wish he was going directly to the source more than he is on here, right? Because at this point, to tie into a thing I was saying about Visigoth on the last one, like, I wish he was actually drawing on his knowledge of classical music more than wiring it through all this pop culture. But, like, still, with this moment, there's kind of there's a hybrid quality to this passage, because at the end, he has this big, flourishing, satisfying resolution turnaround on it, kind of like those Visigoth hooks I was talking about, where, like, we're in this sphere of soundtracky music. It's actually kind of what you want. Even for me, somebody complaining about things like that is what I want, right, in this context, right? So he does this sort of flourishing gothic rise, and then kind of turns it around in this kind of sort of pretty way, in a pretty way.
I get it. Like,
yeah.
I'm starting to like piece it together now. And it's a very goofy way to say it, but the fundamental flaw of this music for you is that it doesn't have Bayonetta gameplay in the background, for you to focus on while you listen to the soundtrack, Which is like, it sounds like goofy and dismissive, but no, I get it. You want it to be applied to something else. You don't feel like it really stands on its own.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think that's kind of true, yeah. I mean, at the worst, after that big turnaround, at worst, it does remind me of loading screen music.
Which is fascinating to me because, like, I have an adjoining sample. I start on that melody, that kind of, like, staggered shuffle melody, which applies to a lot of things that I know about, like, Japanese pop music, which is, of course, going to apply to, like, JRPG video game music. And it was very funny that a part that you thought was, like, really repellent was, like, one of my big moments. I was like, oh, yeah, I get this. 100%.
I enjoyed the loading screen music when I played Final Fantasy XI in high school, right? But it was, like, soothing and nice and Japanese, but, like, in the context of, it feels like a holding pattern. But let's start there, and I'm interested in your thoughts on the Japanese pop thing, because that's something you know way more about than me. And,
okay, yeah. So we're going to continue on Bygone Fortunes from where the black metal guy left off. We adjusted the timestamps a little bit because I started, like, at the beginning of this riff, so we're just adjoining them. We're going to start, like, halfway through the riff that he ended off. Or not riff, because this is not guitar-based music at all. I think the guitars on this might actually be programmed. I don't know if they're actually physically played, but they have a very digital quality. Maybe they're just kind of FL Studio guitar patches or something like that, which would make sense for this music. But anyway, we'll continue from there and progress.
Okay, so your sample closed on, like, your sample closed on that big piano flourish I was talking about. Mm-hmm. But it got a lot of build-up to it, too.
Does that change it for you? That it has a little bit more preparation for it?
Maybe. I mean, again, I liked that big piano flourish part, but, the other thing is, this stuff does just kind of wash by me. So, like, I think, well, I also thought I was doing the other sample when we did that last one, so I missed some shit. So it could have done it on the last sample, but yes, I thought the build up to that is good. And we were talking about that melody in the middle. Dum da da dum. Da da dum dum da da dum dum da 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 dum. That's I don't think it's deep, but it's cool. I like that.
Well,
it's got a feel. That's got a feel there.
Well, because it has that like broken pause, like like 3/4 of the way through the first measure, which makes it interesting. Which makes it, I would say, like that in particular makes it very distinct from extreme metal or more broadly like Western music. That's a very Eastern kind of thing to do.
Or it's a do 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 do. Well, it also just makes it like beat music.
Yeah,
I mean,
it makes
like,
it more
in the sense
like
that there can be
electronic
this like
music.
light hip hoppy electronic subtext to a lot of anime soundtrack stuff, right? But like, so how does this tie into the Japanese pop thing then?
So Japanese music, Japanese pop music, especially, what we're talking about is a legacy after the occupation in World War II, where a lot of American soldiers occupying Japan after 1945 brought over early jazz and blues records, which are extremely important to our understanding of Japanese pop music today. And obviously this is based on an assortment of sources that I've explored over the years because I really like Japanese music in general. But what a few people have said is that, Japanese pop music...
You were watching the Cowboy Bebop guys thing about jazz. You were watching that last summer.
Oh, yeah. No. Cowboy Bebop's soundtrack is outstanding.
Oh, the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack is fantastic. Yeah, as a nerdy middle schooler, I loved that. But he made some other show that was just about jazz, right?
Oh, yeah. It was, it's called Kids on the Slope, which is specifically about jazz in the early 1950s in rural Japan. Wonderful anime. Everybody should watch it. Really cool shit. And it's a time period that I'm personally kind of obsessed with. The idea of, we're bringing in jazz and blues into this culture where it's completely alien and they're adopting it and changing it. So something defining about Japanese pop and rock and metal to a degree is the idea of the kind of the propulsive up-tempo beat against a sort of sad minor key melody. This has become a defining quality of Japanese music in a way.
Oh, a lot of anime opening music is like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, like, listening to that, like, staggered melody at the beginning of my sample or the end of yours was, like, this, like, little syncopated kind of, like, swing note rhythm. I was like, that's a real... That requires a real concerted understanding of this style of music. And he can arrive at it from however many places, from anime or video game soundtracks or through a serious study, but it represents like a recognition of a very important part of this music, which is that dichotomy, the sort of up-tempo rhythm against a sad melody, which is not something you find too often in Western pop music. And I think it's very cool to hear that applied with black metal aesthetics, and I think a lot of that is on something like Hector Rock. Kind of like up-tempo, kind of like jiving.
Europop does it.
Europop definitely does it, or like Eurotrance stuff.
That's
definitely
kind of what I
does
mean.
it.
Yeah, the stuff that verges on electronic, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think
ATC or Cascada.
it's just really cool. But just like that opening, it was interesting. It was the closing of your stuff. You were like Final Fantasy loading music, and I'm like, there we go. Dun 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 dun. I was like, oh fuck yeah, that's cool. That's not the sort of thing you hear in Western music very often, and I like to hear this guy kind of adopting that to this aesthetic.
Isn't this okay? I agree. I mean, like, again, like, I kind of like all these sounds, right? This is like pleasant. It's pleasant anime soundtrack music. Isn't it? Aren't moments like that perilously close to chill beats to study and relax to, or is that just a hill you're going to die on? Because I mean, maybe you will.
I'm not gonna die on that hill. I'm gonna say what's wrong with chill beats to study and relax.
So you just died on the hill.
Is that dying on the hill?
Well, you're making a final stand. Let's say. I think it's up to the listeners to decide who dies.
I would say no. To clarify, I would say, what if chill beats to study and relax to? Is
and
something
I mean, like, chill beats and study to relax to is like inoffensive, right? There are lots of things that are quite like that, sort of like jazzy, down-tempo, Japanese-ish electronica that, like, I hear from time to time, and I'm like, well, this is nice.
Yeah. And okay, so I get where you're getting at. So I guess my argument would be, does everything associated with this sort of aesthetic, black metal, extreme metal, raw metal, whatever you want to call it, does all of it need to be hyper immediate? Does all of it need to be something that encompasses all of our intention? Or is there a place for chill black metal beats to study and relax to? You know?
Hi, this is Taylor from Crushing the Scepter, and you're listening to Terminus Podcast.
Black metal guy.
Yeah, death metal guy.
15 minutes ago, I consumed a THC gummy. You have, at best, a 45-minute window to convince me of your feelings of Anatomia. So many people take their lives for granted. This is your opportunity.
Okay, well, we better hurry up. All right. Well, the death metal guy is still with us.
I'm always stoned when we do this shit. So, but shit'll get really weird in the middle of a sample at one point.
All right. So, Anatomia, Corporeal, Torment, Meisako and Ojo Records, Dark Descent Records. This is a band. The last band sounded like it was from Japan. This is a band that is actually from Japan. The last band sort of sounded like metal. This band is metal. And Anatomia is a. I mean, I partly know them through you, but partly through it's just been a name I've always known through a. I think they did splits with Coffins back in the day, but they also did a split with a band called. Let's see if I can find it.
They've done a lot of splits.
Oh, they've done a ton of splits, but they did a split with a band called Grudge.
Grudge, yeah.
Yeah,
this
is something we bonded over years ago. What is it? Doomed to Hell, Doomed to Death, Damned in Hell?
Yes.
Coffins, Anatomia, Grudge. Grudge is some of the most horrifying music ever, and it's awesome.
I didn't realize you'd actually heard Grudge because I was going to recommend them to you on this show.
I can't believe there was a time in my youth when, during the daytime, I would just walk around listening to things like that and nodding. You know?
Grudge is a fucking nightmare band. Which everybody listening to the show should listen to Grudge.
It's like sewer. It's sort of like extremely crusty death metal, but like not like wasteland barbarian crust, like sewer mutant crust.
Yes.
Someone on Metal Archives once described it. I think once described it as like hooting vocals.
It is very hooting. I've
Which
heard that
I
split.
love. A tortured hoot. So anyway, Anatomia though is the better known band, for good reason. And they're generally associated with autopsy worship. But what do you think, death metal guy?
So this was a last-minute replacement. I wasn't even aware that this record was coming out, because Anatomia is like a band that I check in on periodically, and I'm a longtime fan since the first full-length Dissected Humanity back in 2005. There's a lot of... Well, yeah. So Anatomia began as a sort of autopsy worship band, but I think that's reductive. Because Autopsy, full disclosure, a band that I loved as a kid, and I think almost more than anything in extreme metal has aged really badly. Autopsy is still good music in a sense, but it's like there's elements of their sound that have become extremely played out. These sort of, I describe them as like horror movie riffs. You know, these kind of like slasher movie big fucking like lilting horror movie melodies, and it doesn't work anymore.
I remember when I was younger and I tried it, I think I felt like the slow parts dragged. It's hard to say whether that was me as a young person only wanting things to be fast or an accurate impression, but...
little column A, little column B.
In some ways, Autopsy was very much up my alley, right? Super punked out, raw, early death metal, but I've never really listened to them. Yeah.
That's fair enough. I would say that for you should listen to the following band, Abscess, more. Very, like, straight, like, crust death metal. And I would say that Abscess is probably the origin, very far back, of stuff like Maggot Stomp death metal.
Interesting.
A lot of it sounds a lot like Abscess, which is a really cool band. So, Anatomia was considered sort of autopsy worship for a long time. And yeah, I mean, that's a starting point for the music, but ultimately, it's got its own vibe. It's got its own sound. I mean, it's got a sort of weird, groovy, depraved quality that Autopsy gestured towards, but never fully arrived at. And they were also compared to a lot of other people from the, like, Japanese doom scene, which is kind of its own thing. Like, a lot of people compared Anatomia to Coffins, and it's only in recent years, although we realized it way back in the day, that Coffins is Celtic Frost and Hellhammer. It's not, you know...
No, it's not this.
People describe Coffins as a doom death band, but no, it's Celtic Frost and Hellhammer. It's before doom and death metal were a thing.
Yeah, and like straight Discharge, Master slowed down by 50%, but it doesn't reduce the momentum. It just makes your skanks all the more powerful.
Yeah, you take your Discharge. You take the Discharge record on vinyl and you play it on 33 instead of 45.
Yeah, that's basically what it sounds like. Yeah, I mean, it's awesome.
I bet they had that experience. I bet they had like an old crust punk record and they accidentally played it at the wrong speed, and that inspired their whole band.
No, it like literally like it's from Winter. But like
Winter, of course.
The best parts on that Winter record are like that. But yeah, I hear exactly what you mean. And it's like, the funny thing is Coffins is so groovy and so good that they sound faster than the bands that play like 4 times as fast.
Yeah, and it's also like unbelievably brutal. Like, like Coffins is some of the most brutal music ever made.
All right, well we better start. We're talking about cool Japanese. We better talk about Anatomia again.
Okay, so Anatomia. All right, so you're starting at this idea of autopsy plus kind of like crusty doom stuff, and I've popped back and forth listening to Anatomia over the years, checking out a new record or usually a new split. And Anatomia is a band that has very high peaks and very low valleys. You can tell while listening to them there's records they care about and records they don't really care about. There's certain splits that are just very phoned in, and then there's some splits where they're totally on top of it and they really give a shit. And they've done so many splits over the years, that's become kind of their standard mode. But now, listening to Corporeal Torment, I expected it to be cool, but I did not expect it to be, like, severe and ugly and cruel in the way that it is. I mean, this is really malignant, awful music.
Yeah, I mean, autopsy type stuff, and even arguably autopsy, is kind of like fun death metal, in some sense. You know, bang your head, motherfucker, kind of stuff. This is deeply enjoyable, but not at all fun. This is very serious, very arty music.
Oh yeah, because my hot take for this one is going to be, this might be the first torture doom record since the late 2000s.
And if you're wondering what the hell is torture doom, you can become a Terminus patron and listen to a bonus episode where the death metal guy gives the entire history of torture doom, a genre nobody cares about.
Well, after doing that bonus episode with me, how do you feel about that assessment? This is,
no, I think that's,
to me,
right.
This is pretty fucking torture doom. There's a lot of worm phlegm on this.
Yes, definitely the sort of more, the less, yeah, the great thing about worm phlegm is it works on this very abstract but also very immediate level. And worm phlegm is kind of riff-driven in a way that almost creates similarities to death and black metal and thrash and shit like that. Very slow, obviously, but you don't get that here. But it's definitely works viscerally in a way that's kind of different from some of the more just... This is satisfying to listen to in a way that worm phlegm is, as opposed to the sort of purely torturous torture doom bands. Which I know you find satisfying to listen to because you're a fucking maniac. But like, so this is... if anything, yeah, Torture Doom, I would say, is almost, like, the first track is kind of just, they're like, okay, let's do a muddy blasting plus slow part song. That's their kind of crusty death metal thing. Personally, I like the fast parts and don't like the slow parts. Okay, whatever. The real record, I think you would agree, is the last three tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are the only ones we sampled from.
Well, it's only 4 tracks on the whole record.
Exactly. So. Yeah. So like they do a first track just to say, hey, we're Anatomia. We like to play death metal low and loud. And then they go for this more expansive, ambitious thing. And yeah, I mean, I'd say it's basically torture doom. You've described torture doom as a subgenre of funeral doom. Well, you definitely get more funeral doom majesty here, although in a very sort of leprous and crippled form. And, you know, like, but there is a kind of beauty to a lot of it. And, you know, it might remind me of, like, more, you know, the parts of the Peaceville stuff that are kind of really slow and elegiac. You know, like, but...
like the ugliest parts off, like, early My Dying Bride.
Yeah, or even if you took, like, the kind of melodicism you get in something like Sear Me, but instead of being kind of canned arpeggio pianos and the guy singing... No, I mean, that song's great, but it's very dated production, right? But, like, those kind of lush melodies, very slow, crawling, depressive, but here it's all texture, right? There's no, like, you know, there's no sort of pop quality to grab onto.
Well, it's interesting because, like, the promo material for this described them, especially in some of the very abstract kind of, like, dark ambient moments that, like, dot across this record, which are significant moments. They describe them as being, like, almost music concrete. in the way that they are delivered, which I kind of get in a way. It's like it's deeply, infatuated with ideas of extreme texture and sound objects. And we're going to come across some of those.
Music Concrete is, because yours truly forgets.
Oh, Music Concrete is like proto-industrial music from early 20th century Italy.
I thought it was entirely sample-based, or like sort of recording real stuff.
I mean, Music Concrete is it's an idea that was fully established after it was done. There was a lot of very early ideas of sampling and sound objects. I guess the best way to describe it would be an attempt at industrial music before the tools necessary for that really emerged.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll learn more about Music Concrete later. But, yes, definitely feels at times like dark ambient or like the kind of like ritual industrial stuff that I like. I mean, Ten-Horned Beast is something that's sort of on the cusp between that and drone metal and shit like that. This could be like that. But yeah, let's listen to it, man.
Yeah, so let's go to the second track, which we kind of join. Let's listen to Slime of Putrescence. So, as you said, the
not just any slime.
The opening track, as you said, Dismemberment, is like them doing, let's do a crowd pleaser for guys who like the kind of like crusty death stuff. And it's a good track. It's got very cool, like, weird slowed down blast parts. And like big dramatic winter riffs, but like you said, ultimately this record starts with Slime of Putrescence. So I'm gonna go towards the end of this track, and then you'll see what happens with our sample. So let's go to the end of Slime of Putrescence.
All right.
That's some of the most, like, brutally ugly shit we've ever featured on the show, I think.
That's pretty ugly. Yeah, that is uglier. Is that uglier than what's the Swedish band by the guy from Sacramento?
Oh shit. Which one?
we liked that one. The one that was almost Torture Doom. The
Bergeraven?
No. No, we featured it on the show. It was the Anyway, we did one that was pretty ugly back towards the beginning of the show, but this is very ugly.
Yeah. Oh, Funeral Orchestra.
Yeah, there we go. But like Funeral Orchestra is more kind of like crypto black metal riffy, whereas this is just desolate.
Yeah. No, this is like very Torture Doom. in a way. It's like, I mean, this record as a whole is more of a funeral doom record than anything, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing that fascinates me about this is just like relative to a lot of the torture doom stuff, how listenable this is for me. Like, not only do I find this impressive in that's so fucked up and kind of oppressive way, I like really enjoyed listening to it. And it has something to do with, I mean, like, listen to those sort of, you get that very tritone based cycling power chords at the base of that riff, and then you get this sort of delicate single note sounding over it in this kind of unpredictable way. And they're not really they're at some pretty dissonant intervals, but it nevertheless has a kind of lushness here, like flowers from a corpse or something.
Well, that's a very Wormflem technique, I would say.
Is it? Okay.
I mean, yeah, because Wormflem was always based off these, like, ugly, dissonant kind of chord intervals with a sort of delicate lead melody over it.
Mm-hmm. I remember that one melody you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, and specifically, like, even more attached to this, a lot of the Wormflem lead melodies were very kind of Eastern or, like, Arabic inspired. And you get a little bit of that here, Just this, like, dreadful kind of crawling tritone idea where you, like I said on the bonus episode, you see the Hashishans, smoking their pipes before they plot their new murder,
Maybe. I could hear something like that last little melody as like that. We just have different associations too, but So let's go straight into, we're going to start with the end of Slime of Putrescence and then show how it launches into the next track, Despaired Void. And I really like this moment.
Oh, Despaired Void is the much more kind of traditionally funeral doom track on this. There's only...
A lot of the stuff I've been... No,
go ahead. I was just going to say...
fuck, go.
Yeah. Okay, so there's only 4 tracks on this album, and all of them have very distinct personalities. And Despaired Void is a beautiful, to me, a beautifully sad funeral doom track. This is kind of like the most romantic song to me. Like, it's like horrible and mutated, but there's a core of, like, Peaceville doom on this track.
I think that is a presence here. So, let's go end of Slime of Putrescence, and then we'll roll it in. dun, 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 dun.
It's very peaceful, and it's also very Japanese at the same time. It's unique unto itself, I would say. Apart from certain very deep cut Japanese doom stuff.
Oh, really?
back
Yeah.
in the
One
day.
Japanese thing this reminds me of is Corrupted.
Yes, I can see that.
Corrupted is, again, it's sort of like, what is it? Oh, kind of crusty doom death or something. But a lot of the Corrupted is like rich, kind of neurosis-y, but like sort of richly atmospheric guitar. A lot of Corrupted is very beautiful.
Oh yeah, like El Mundo Frio is
Yeah.
the album.
Yeah. So this is similar to that in a way, but what's awesome? It's kind of there's a elegant sort of kind of consummate melodic riff at the beginning, right? And then it just dies away into that last little dong 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 dong, and that just keeps ringing out over and over. This also, I mean, I'm sure it also comes in via Peaceville, but there is authentic goth feel here, I think.
Yes.
Especially the most decadent, miserable goth stuff. So, like, I mention them a lot on this show, so someday we'll have to play them, but Lycia, Ionia, or something like that, the nastiest parts of Christian Death, or like Pornography Era Cure has this quality of being... Pornography Era Cure has the quality of being often very consonant, very kind of like... often kind of like Dorian scale melodies, but like so fucked up.
Yeah.
And similar, just chiming, echoing, spaced out guitar style, and sort of weird collisions of that with other stuff. So like there, throughout, you've got the whole idea of the more melodic part superimposed on a bass that's just like bedrock death doom chug. Like, that's a riff. And that's the thing that black metal used to specialize in, which is putting something melodic simultaneously with something grinding. This band is doing that at a very low tempo, but it sounds awesome. I love this song. And just like about this record in general, like I felt that these are very long songs. I got my final sample I still had at least 10 minutes to go in Mortem. If there's a quick and dirty way to sometimes listen to these records if I need to, right? Where it's like, okay, the death metal guy sampled that part. I'm not going to sample that part. Occasionally one can listen to, 2/3 of a record or something. Like, I couldn't turn this off.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to get
this is-
going on the show, and I was like, I wanted to get going on the show, and I couldn't turn it off. It's like you have to respect the record and let it play to its conclusion. And it's kind of like turning to gawk at a car crash.
Yeah. This is like horribly desperate music. Like, this is. I'll go on a limb and say this is the first torture doom record as a whole in many years. And I don't know how much, Wormflem or Senthil these guys were listening to, but they have to have been exposed to it.
They've got to be. I mean, if there's any place where you can count on people, like, knowing their shit, it's Japan. Like,
Definitely.
guys in these bands have comprehensive knowledges of like everything remotely related to their genre, right? Like, Japanese D-beat bands can tell you about like demos recorded in the marshlands of East Anglia in 1985.
They definitely can.
Yeah.
There's something about this record, though, that really touches me, and it's this whole... There's a real sense of, like, suffering across it. It's like... Nowadays, like, extreme doom stuff has been commodified in a way, in part by bands like Bellwitch,
You make fun of Ahab a lot.
I make fun of Ahab a lot because Ahab are just like whatever to me, but I know that a lot of people like them. But I would say, like, the bigger snake's head would be Bell Witch. And, which is funny, because that's a case
also
where...
Sun Up.
Yeah, Sun, to a degree, because they were affiliated with so many cool people. But Bell Witch, I would say, is the one. Because Bell Witch is like... It's sort of a Magla situation, where it's like Bell Witch are a very good band who led to terrible things. You know? But we gotta get to the backside of the record. The 20-minute epic called Mortem. And this is a torture doom song. In the same vein as, like, Disjecta Membrae, but, like, a little less noisy, a little more sparse. And I remember hearing this, you know, just the other day. I was like, holy shit, there's people actually doing this music right now. So we've got adjoining samples for this one. And let's go about halfway into Mortem. And in a horrible fucking break going into your section. And I'll talk about, like, the sort of abstract feeling I get after we play this. That's fucking horrible.
It's just like there's just a pulse that keeps going.
Yeah. And it's like the slowdown when it comes in. It's just, oof. God, there's a real weight, a real horror to that, which is not common in Doom anymore. You know, it's easy to make Doom music that's kind of like romantic and sad and, like, as you described, about girls in a way. Mm-hmm. This is not about girls. This is about
if it's about girls, it's very go to jail.
Yeah, no. This is not about girls. This is about, like, horrible internal feelings. And I described it, writing about the record in the notes, it was like, as a direct question, what's the sickest physically that you've ever been? Mm-hmm. For me, there's been a couple moments in my life where I was physically ill.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
And I was so sick, so feverish that thought processes didn't work the correct way. I couldn't create coherent thoughts in my head. I was like, I was probably cracking like 103-degree fever, just like almost on death's doorstep, and then just being there, for periods of time that felt to me like eternity, but only passed in minutes in real time. And this kind of captures that feeling of just being disoriented and delirious, just like a sort of agony, a sort of suffering that lasts forever. And I'm realizing, again, I described it as such before, but it's like describing it in these terms makes it torture doom, Mm-hmm. Like, this is just like incredibly cruel music that wants to present those worst moments physically to you. This has nothing to do ultimately with shit that I associate with normal funeral doom. This is about those moments of like primal suffering. And that is fucking awesome that there's guys making that music now,
Yeah, so what I like about this part is no matter how slow it is, there's just this insistent pulse to it. And you get this feeling of like, pardon me, sneeze. So brutal I sneezed. You get this feeling of sort of like bells chiming. I'm a sucker for bell sounds, right? But
yeah.
And things that sound like bells, the just deep resonant tones. You get this the repeated insistent chime of the low end chords, just jong, jong, and then right here you're going to hear the sort of higher goth line of guitar come back in faintly, making airier bell sounds. It just sounds like bells in the mist, haunting, desolate, kind of Bloodborne territory. Let's go to... So we'll just keep rolling.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, that last part is very traditional funeral doom, like Thergathon in a way.
How so?
This sort of like climbing, complex guitar melody.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of funeral doom nowadays is based off of like a big, very slowed down chord structure stuff. Thergathon made real melodies.
They had like riffs. Skepticism had riffs too, but they were under the keys, and Thergathon was very riff forward.
Riff forward, but also very erudite in a way that you don't usually hear.
Very austere riffing. I mean, so it does, yeah, Thergathon ticks all boxes for me. Dude, yeah, no, I hear that for sure. I mean, you got a minute before we closed out, but it started doing it again when we closed out. You got the climbing escalade, he lays on the drums, and I think that's what you're talking about, those ascending chords.
Yeah.
And you could hear, right, just that second line is making these high chiming sounds in the background, and that's definitely a guitar. But it has the wonderful kind of like semitonal quality of actual bells. It's it's definitely disturbing and dark shit, but to me this whole passage is just gorgeous. This is like, I mean, I'm not trying to say like, oh, so edgy, haha, you know, I feel at home in this or whatever, but like it's just sort of rich and overwhelming and majestic, while keeping that, while keeping the visceral quality, right? You know, this is, most bands wouldn't, if a band is having a record that's structured from let's start on the really sort of upfront banger and then go more out, especially when they're dealing with music this kind of deliberately sprawling and obscure, right? You would just kind of fade out on the sprawling obscurity, I think. Maybe it would dissolve into ambient music or something.
Yeah.
This, they just, in those last couple minutes, they just start cranking up the metal again, while preserving this sort of all the layers of chiming noise they've already built. And you can almost headbang to it. And like by this point, it's like, yeah, so Torture Doom is clearly the right reference point, but at this point it almost feels like they're doing a prettier version of like the things Portal was known for back in the day. Like, Portal, yeah, they got, in some sense, they became a bit of a, I don't know if overrated is the right word, but they became a bit of a meme, right? In part,
yeah.
And, their sound was, I don't think it was a cheap trick, but they had this specific signature sound. Portal's a cool band that I should go back to, but like Portal definitely wasn't like Portal was definitely like help get me out of here music. This has that quality, but it also has this sort of lush, entrancing quality that I find fascinating. And disoriented. I don't know. It's fucking awesome, man.
Yeah. No. Portal, there's an escape.
Non ci fa fare niente.